Hey, what's up guys? This is Rudy from Pro Civic, and in today's video we're going to show you how to install some D2 racing coilovers to improve the performance, handling, and stance of your ride. Overall, this installation is pretty straightforward. Coilovers are generally a simple install compared to even lowering springs. There is some adjustment that will be required. As you can see, it's fully adjustable in spring preload and ride height. These coilovers offer a lot of adjustability and dampening, and are going to be a direct replacement for the factory setup. So let's go ahead and get right into it and show you how to install these coilovers. As you can see, we already have the vehicle lifted securely, and we're going to start off by removing a 14mm nut here for the sway bar link. You want to make sure you do this on both sides. It makes it a lot easier, even if you're just doing one side at a time. Having this disconnected or unbolted makes it easier. We'll then unbolt this 12mm hex head back here, holding this bracket to the spindle. This will help with the removal of the strut, and also 3 17mm nuts down here. There's 3 of them holding the ball joint to the lower control arm. You might want to have a jack supporting the control arm when you do so. Now we'll remove this 17mm nut, clamping the spindle to the strut. And finally, the 3 14mm nuts at the upper strut mount. And make sure at this point you are supporting the control arm, otherwise the whole strut assembly might come down. Now we'll carefully support the spindle, separating the control arm from the ball joint. Having left one nut installed at the upper strut mount, we'll push down on the spindle assembly and separate the strut from the spindle. Now we'll set the preload on our spring by compressing the overall length by about 1/8 inch, putting some tension with this lower perch, and setting the ride height approximately. We are going to be adjusting this after we're finalizing the install, but for now we're going to measure this out to about 9 3/8 inch from the top of this lower mount. Before we continue, we're going to go ahead and lubricate the upper and lower spring seats. At this point, we'll reattach the ball joint to the control arm and tighten the 3 nuts down to about 40 foot-pounds. At this point, we can install our coilover assembly or strut with the D2 logo pointing in towards the center of the car. You might want to center the upper mount in its slot before you torque it down. And we'll torque these down to about 40 foot-pounds as well. And just to make sure they aren't loose, we'll tighten down the socket head bolts using a 5mm hex key. Finally, we'll apply a little bit of the anti-rust lubricant and articulate the pillow ball to get full coverage. Carefully jack up the control arm to raise the spindle into location. Make sure you have the alignment pin facing back to align with the slot on the spindle. Making sure the strut doesn't bind, wiggle the spindle assembly to align everything properly. Once the lower mount sits flush with the spindle, go ahead and insert your 17mm bolt and torque it down to a factory torque spec. In our case, we torqued it down to 80 foot-pounds. Reinstall the brake line bracket with your 12mm bolt. We're choosing to install these adjustable white line end links on our car to avoid any potential rubbing issues during aggressive driving, and also give us additional adjustment as well. These white line end links are adjustable in length, and we set ours up to about a 12 1/8 inch length. From now until the end of May 2017, we're going to include these as a promotional item, but for the latest info, please refer to our website or contact us. In any case, it does help to use a little bit of blue Loctite on these nuts, just to prevent them from coming loose in the future. Once you have finalized your ride height settings, you want to tighten down the lock collars using a screwdriver and hammer, or maybe the wrench and a hammer. You want to make sure they're really snug so they don't come loose while driving. And it's also a good idea to mark them with a metal marker to visually inspect them if you ever need to. Moving on to the rear, we'll start in a similar fashion by removing the end links on the sway bars. It's ideal to remove both left and right at the same time. And for this, we'll use a 12mm socket on the bottom and a 14mm wrench up top. Removing the wheel well or liner isn't completely necessary for this installation, but it'll help give you guys a better view of what bolts we're going to remove next. At this point, we'll put a little bit of tension on the lower control arm using a jack, and we'll start removing the shock. Using a 12mm socket and ratchet, we'll go ahead and remove the two upper mount bolts. Using a 17mm wrench and some additional leverage, we'll remove the 17mm bolt at the bottom of the shock. Now that the shock is removed, we'll go ahead and remove the stock spring. Be careful when you do this. Releasing the tension abruptly could cause the spring to pop out. So slowly lower the suspension, and you might have to twist the spring out, but be careful as you're doing so. Now before we start throwing on the coilovers for the rear, we'll go ahead and take these stock bushings and modify them to fit our new setup. And all that needs to be done is to remove these kind of retainers or tabs on either of these, just so that they'll be able to locate properly both on the tighter end here and on the spring perch. We're pretty much ready to snap on the rear coil assembly, but before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and apply some of the anti-rust lubricant on here, and also set our initial settings for the ride height. To start off, we're just going to go ahead and back this off, basically make it as tall as possible, and lock it in place for the time being. We'll start off by installing the lower rubber isolator and then installing the coil and sleeve assembly. Now that the spring is in place, we'll put a little bit of tension on the suspension just so it won't come loose as we're going to install the shock absorber. Before we install the new D2 shock in place, we'll go ahead and remove the upper mount off of the stock shock assembly. Using a 14mm wrench and a 5mm Allen key, undo the upper shock nut. The D2 shock has its own rubber bump stop, so you can go ahead and remove the factory one. Installation of the upper mount to the D2 Racing shock is the reversal of what you just did. The only main difference is going to be that you're going to use a 17mm wrench to tighten down the nut. Now before you install the upper mount on the new D2 Racing shock, You want to make sure this threaded sleeve is tightened down properly, and then we'll go ahead and slide our new mount over that assembly. We're almost ready to assemble this shock onto the vehicle, but before we do that, we're going to go ahead and adjust our dampener setting. Make sure they're equal side to side because this is a little bit tricky to get to when it's already on the car. To determine our shock length, we set the car down on the ground to get close to our ride height after having adjusted the coil sleeve to get to our final setting. Then we went ahead and raised the car back up, compress the suspension to match the wheel gap or the overall ride height of the suspension to the chassis of the car. Then we measured the length from the upper mount to the lower mounting area on the shock. For our application, we got a static ride height length for the shock of about 22 3/4 inch. So we'll go ahead and add 2 inches to that length and adjust our shocks to match that. Now that we know what our total shock length needs to be, we'll go ahead and make our adjustments here and lock it down once we're done. Now we'll go ahead and drop our shock in place. You may need to put some tension on the suspension, raise it up or down, just to get the suspension into a perfect spot where you could easily install the shock. We can now go ahead and release the tension we had on the jack and install the sway bar end links as well. And that'll pretty much do it for the installation of the D2 Racing coilovers on our 10th gen Civic project car. Overall, it was pretty straightforward. Just a few little things in there, tips and tricks that'll help you out. But once you've done that, you go ahead and lower your car, get your car on the ground, dial in your ride height settings. You might need to adjust the rear spring perch and the front lower mount on the strut to set your ride height. After that, make sure all your nuts and bolts are properly torqued to spec. Drive it around the block a few times, make sure there's no squeaks or rattles. And once you're satisfied with the ride height, the installation of the coilovers, go ahead and get it aligned. You want to make sure you do this to extend the life of your tires as much as possible. And we also recommend a rear camber kit. So check out our website for more information on these coilovers, camber kits, any other parts you might be looking for your 10th gen. Once again, my name is Rudy from ProCivic. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let us know if you have any questions or comments down below. Subscribe to our channel. Check out our Facebook and Instagram pages, and I'll see you next time.